Why do you play games? Why do we play games? The answer is highly subjective. For some, it's an escape, for others, competition, and there is a long list of reasons why millions of players every day sign on and play a few hours of their favorite titles. Turns out, mainstream gaming news media doesn't really like that. It's by no means something brand new. A sort of underlying expectation has existed for many years within a large section of the game journalist community that games should attempt to make a stand, and by make a stand, I mean convey a position of right and wrong, largely motivated by politics. There are a number of different examples I regularly bring up. Games like Far Cry 5, Battlefield 5, Call of Duty World War II, and more recently, The Division 2, or even further, Ghost Recon Breakpoint, a game that is months away from release. I won't go in depth on all the previous examples here, but a game like Far Cry 5 was attacked by mainstream gaming news, and to be clear, when I say mainstream gaming news, I'm talking about sites like Kotaku, Polygon, The Verge, that kind of shit. And not that kind of shit as a synonym for that kind of stuff, like some people say nowadays. No, that kind of shit as in shit or fecal matter. But anyways, Far Cry 5 was attacked despite being a largely successful and relatively fun experience, which sold quite well by the way, for not presenting a strongly opinionated narrative against certain demographics. Another example is Battlefield 5, which is a really complicated one, but to summarize briefly, the game's development team made diversity a prominent focal point. By itself, that's a non-factor, but in a World War II game, an emphasis on female British frontline commando amputees, something is off with that for a game that claims to be the most immersive experience yet, and is not tagged with the label of historical fiction. But even then, still not something I would have cared about had the animosity between development team and player base not been so obvious. At various points, high-ranking developers said things like, if you don't like it, don't buy it, and even went as far as to call their own fanbase uneducated because they themselves had decided to market a game poorly and made a bunch of historically inaccurate creative choices. Needless to say, the game didn't do so well, but still, this is a bit of a tangent. The reason it's relevant is because this was a targeted stance which aligned quite well with what the current mainstream gaming media expects to see. On the one hand, mainstream outlets praised the game and made it a deliberate point to disparage the naysayers who attempted to voice even mild or reasonably articulated criticisms of the creative choices. But on the other hand, the game was such a flop it caused EA's share price to tank almost 20% purely based off of its weak sales numbers. The development team chose to give Battlefield 5 a contemporary message, if you will, which led to positive press but terrible sales. There is a long list of instances just like this one. The more overt a game's message becomes, especially when that message has ties to modern politics or social issues, the more people will back away from it. And in a retail environment, when profit margins and sales volume matters quite a bit, creative choices that hurt the game's overall financial success are not necessarily the right idea. I am by no means saying that games can't have a strong social or political message. They certainly can, but they can also be criticized for that message should they choose to push it, whatever it may be. This brings us to the true point, where once games were criticized for the message they did have or the story they chose to tell, now games are being criticized for the stories they didn't tell or the messages they don't have. The main example at the moment is Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Now, I'm no expert on the Ghost Recon franchise as a whole. I liked Wildlands, I actually had a lot of fun with the PvP, especially back when thermal vision was stupidly overpowered, and I didn't particularly like the campaign, but it was a perfectly fine game. Because of that vague interest, I was mildly curious when the new Breakpoint trailer dropped, and to be honest, it looked pretty cool. Obviously, it's a cinematic reveal designed to create hype, so through that lens I didn't really fully trust it, but there were some interesting moments and it seemed worthwhile to keep an eye out. To me, it's the early stages where a game has just been revealed, so there really isn't all that much to say, and I'm not that interested, so I didn't do a trailer analysis or something similar to that. But then, a few people forwarded me some of the articles already releasing which target Breakpoint and have already, I shit you not, begun to spread negative press about the game because they don't think it's going to be political enough. They are effectively criticizing a game for not telling a message they want it to tell, and the game isn't even out yet. This isn't the first time that Ubisoft has been criticized for avoiding politics. The Division 2 is a brilliant example of a title that improved on a significant number of problems that the first iteration had. It sold extremely well, it has been met with wonderful levels of support, and yet articles like this one hit the scene which claim that the game's refusal to engage with politics make it hard to enjoy. To be fair, everyone has their own motivations for playing, but in my experience, the vast majority of players enjoy a game because it is fun to play, not because of its political commentary. To go a step further, there are articles like this one, and the language here is what really goes from possibly rational to total what the fuck. When you look at the bigger picture of The Division 2, the premise is nearly as ridiculous and far-fetched. Washington, D.C. is lawless and locked down after a deadly viral outbreak, and it's up to you, an agent a secret federal task force charged with, well, fixing America, to restore order and rebuild that symbol of U.S. freedom, the White House. Yes, that includes rescuing the president. There's just a small problem with that premise. In the US of 2019, when Donald Trump is historically unpopular and is perhaps best described as the country's first bona fide despot, it's hard for a lot of people to get fired up by the Division 2's effort to make America great again. The White House isn't much of a symbol for American freedom when it's occupied by a tyrant. Here's why Ubisoft, the Division's publisher, thought that approach would work. The Division 2 isn't making any political statements. That's what Terry Spear, one of the game's creative leads, told Polygon in a June 2018 interview. I'm just going to say that you are a veteran agent who was activated before the time of the Division 2 and you got the SOS call. Okay, you're war-torn, you're tired, you've been doing Division stuff elsewhere, and you arrive in DC to find what it is you're going to find. And you're going to rebuild and make sure that DC does not collapse, Shade does not collapse, and that the nation does not collapse. And so it should be clear, we're definitely not making any political statements, right? This is still a work of fiction, right? The audacity of making a statement like that in 2018... wow, that is an epic facepalm. And about a game set in the crumbling ruins of Washington, D.C. was obviously not lost on an ever-watchful internet. Ubisoft faced sharp criticism almost immediately after Polygon's story published, and the whole "it's not political" thing has become a running joke. Wow. Now, the article does go on to say that this was their stance before the game launched, and since the game has launched and they had a great deal of fun playing it, they realized that it is a better product because it did not engage with politics in a detrimental way. But that in no way exonerates them from having preemptively attacked a game simply because they thought it might not contain enough political propaganda that aligned with their viewpoints. The basic concept outlined by Terry Spear is a city in crisis where you, the player, prevent collapse while battling through the streets of Washington, D.C. Ubisoft has long decided not to take a targeted stance, and the results have spoken for themselves. The game is extremely popular, has a lot of quality content, and is being met with widespread positivity. To be fair, the PvP is an absolute disaster, but by and large, people like the game. The backlash, or so-called backlash, whatever that really means in the context of this article, came almost exclusively from media sites like The Verge, or Polygon, or Mashable. With Battlefield 5, fans were unhappy, media was very happy, game was a failure and it totally flopped. With Division 2, fans were happy, media was unhappy, game is a resounding success. Starting to see a pattern here? For Ghost Recon Breakpoint, it appears to be an even earlier and more exaggerated occurrence. Here's a paragraph from lead developer Sebastian Leprestre. I'm probably mispronouncing that, I apologize, but moving on. We're creating a game here. We're not trying to make political statements in our games. We've rooted ourselves in reality, and you'll get what you get out of your playthrough. Everybody will get something different out of their experience. The story might make you see different situations, but we're not trying to guide anybody or make any sort of statements. It's a what-if scenario. It's Tom Clancy. It's purely fictional. To most sane human beings, that sounds completely reasonable, right? The game creates a world, it lets you experience that world, but it isn't trying to tell you how to think. You might draw some conclusions from its narrative, sure, but those conclusions are reliant on how you choose to interpret what the game offers. They are not beaten into your brain. Making overly aggressive political statements is bad for business. It's a proven fact. And Ubisoft doesn't want to tell their user base what to think, so they create a world and let the players think for themselves. But mainstream gaming media can't stand that. Sites like Polygon or The Verge or whatever else have a narrative that they believe and want to push, but it is so far beyond that now. Where once upon a time they used to criticize a game that ran counter to their preferred narrative, which is completely normal, everyone tends to do that, let me be clear, they now criticize anything that does not outright push their preferred narrative. It's lunacy. The shift from criticizing things you don't like to hear to criticizing anything that does not say the exact things you want to hear, even before anything has been said and you have no idea what will be said, is mind-blowing and demonstrates the growing schism between gaming media and their fan base, or to go even further, between the media and rational reality. At this point, I think it's important to say that I'm not really passionate about politics. It's definitely fun to engage in the debate here and there, but I find myself more often than not disagreeing with Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, all of them. I'm certainly an advocate against forced inclusion of political themes in video games, but I am not against those themes existing if they are done in an artistic way. But what I simply cannot reconcile in my mind is how and why games are now being criticized for what they might not say well before they have even said or not said it. Gaming media has been a joke for a long time now, but this is a new low. The one positive I can glean is that Ubisoft has realized that shoehorning in politics negatively impacts their games, and by learning that lesson, they have now drawn the ire of the hacky mainstream gaming outlets, which might lead to a divorce between Ubisoft, as well as any other publishers who follow suit, and these obsolete journalists. For far too long, the industry has operated around an industrial hype wheel that churns out exclusives, interviews, and insider access to these outlets. But as companies do their fiscal duty and think about growing the sales volume, they may continue to edge away from controversial and typically damaging inclusion of contemporary social and political agendas, which would infuriate gaming journalists even further, and perhaps, fingers crossed here, lead to a redirection of access involving a wider and better suited group of video game enthusiasts. It's far from certain, and at the moment, this new phase of demonizing things that don't exist for things they might not even say is beyond annoying, but it's something, and good might come of it. That's it though, enough rambling. If you want to support the channel, there are links down below. I will also be out of town for the next 6 or so days, possibly a week. I'll be working on a game, or maybe consulting on a game. I'm not sure exactly what to call it, but I will be at a studio giving feedback, so I'll be pretty much going radio silent until I get back. The content will resume as soon as I am back around the 19th, I think, but that really is it. Thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.